Good afternoon, everyone. It, br- it brings me immense joy to extend a warm welcome to each one of you for another enriching session of the ICS Wednesday seminar. My name is Amit Dogra, and I'm a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Study. I will serve as the master of ceremony for today's event. I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you who has joined us. The title for today's seminar is Deng Xiaoping's policy on border issues toward India, Russia, and Japan in comparison with Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping. As China cautiously inches towards the China Ring, which now lies 2 decades away, its assertion in its neighborhood has increased. From land to sea, China is involved in border conflicts. Having solved their border disputes with Russia in 2004, China has still land border dispute with India and Bhutan, as well as maritime border dispute in South China Sea and in the East China Sea. In this edition of Wednesday seminar, we will discuss how Deng Xiaoping's policy to shelve the disputes with neighbors could be evaluated in comparison with the policies in Mao Zedong's era and contemporary China under Xi Jinping. The speaker for today is Keiji Ide, who is currently teaching international relations at the Graduate School of Rikyo University, Tokyo, and Japanese history at the Higher School of Economics, Moscow. He is a former ambassador and has served for 40 years in the Japanese Foreign Services. He worked as Minister of Japan to People's Republic of China, Minister of Japan to Russia, Ambassador to Croatia. In Beijing, he worked as a press spokesperson of the Japanese embassy and gave numerous interviews with the Chinese media. His publication includes How to Cope with Chinese Media, Public Diplomacy, The History of China-Russia Border Negotiations, Emerging Legal Orders in the Arctic. Chairing today's session is Avtar Singh Bhasin, who retired from the Ministry of External Affairs in 1993 after 3 decades of service as head of historical division. Since then, he has taken to academic research. He was senior fellow at the Indian Council of Historical Research and an honorary fellow at the Institute of Contemporary China, Contemporary Studies of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. He has produced several studies on South Asia. He has several publications in his names, including documentary studies and books like Some Call It Partition, Some Freedom, Last 75 Days of the Raj, India and Sri Lanka Between Lion and the Tigers, India Pakistan Neighbours at Odd, and Nehru, Tibet and China. His forthcoming book is titled Negotiating India's Landmark Agreements, which is being published by the Penguin. Before I hand over to the chair, let me lay out a few housekeeping rules. All participants are requested to remain muted during the presentation. Questions can be posed in the chat box during the event, or you can use the raise hand option. Also, participants are kindly requested to mention their title and affiliation along with the questions for better identification. After the presentation, you will be called upon to unmute yourself and ask questions. That's all. I now hand over the floor to the chair to take the proceedings forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, my friend. It gives me great pleasure to be present here and chairing the session with Ambassador Ide. Let me first of all welcome Ambassador Ide, who is here today, though he is speaking to us on the web. Let me also welcome all those who have joined us this afternoon. We are going to hear an interesting talk. Ide, Ambassador Ide is going to talk to us about three different personalities in China's recent history, while the third one is still in office and making impact on the current developments. Two of them in their time performed certain tasks which were need of that hour. Mao unified China, Deng Xiaoping opened it and developed it economically, and Xi Jinping has taken the task of to defend what China created since the 50s. Zhou Enlai had at the Bandung conference declared that his country's borders with all its neighbors were unsettled and assured that they would be settled peacefully. It was in that spirit that Mao's China tried to sort out its borders with countries in our region to start with and signed border agreements with Nepal, Pakistan, Burma, Afghanistan. It did make an effort to settle with India too. Please excuse me when I say that it was India's failure to take a realistic attitude that the border was not settled, led to a war and problems which have become much more difficult to solve now, if anything. In sorting out its problem with neighbors, China might not have been motivated by any altruistic intention, but did make efforts goes without saying. If during Mao's time, border with Japan and Soviet Union were not settled, it was more for historical reasons. However, what was not settled by Mao, Deng settled. Deng, as you know, is remembered more for opening of China and developing its potential economically that needed peaceful climate. He therefore took special care that China's remaining border was settled, and he did settle them. By the time Xi Jinping came, China's territorial borders were more or less settled, including with Vietnam and the Soviet Union. What are not settled are the maritime borders with almost all the Southeast Asian countries, both in East China and South China Sea. It has fallen to the share of Xi, who thinks it is his duty to hold on to what is his inheritance, since he feels overconfident that it can dictate terms to all its neighbors. When looking at the attitude of Chinese leader, whether Mao or Deng or Xi Jinping, one is to, but it's important to take note that time in which they operated, the constraint Mao had became less by the time Deng came into power. And when Xi became chairman, China had almost reached the peak of its power and looked upon itself as a superpower, not willing to accommodate another point of view. Now we have the advantage of the presence of Ambassador Ide, who has first-hand knowledge of China. May I, on your behalf, request him to share his views? Professor Ide.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for your kind words, Mr. Amit Dogra and Mr. Avtar Singh Bhasin, and also for the kind arrangement of today's meeting. I'd like to express my gratitude to Dr. Alka Acharya. And so, can I start my presentation now?
Please.
Okay. And so, hello everyone. My name is KG De. I worked in the Foreign Ministry of Japan for 40 years, and 3 years ago I retired. And now I work in several universities, and also I pursue my PhD degree. And my topic is India-China border issue. Because in Japan, there is no one good book on that topic. So ordinary Japanese don't understand what's going on between India and China. I think this is very important topic, and Japanese should clearly understand. But so far, no good book. So my plan is to get PhD degree and eventually publish a book on India-China border negotiations. And I'm a diplomat, so I always respect colleagues of Indian Foreign Ministry and Chinese Foreign Ministry. And I used to work in Moscow 3 times. So I have respect to Russian Foreign Ministry, and Russia and China made compromise. And so when I was in Russia, I collected materials, and also I collected Chinese memoirs of diplomats. And so I wrote a book on Russia-China border negotiations. And so I want to have a hint how to address to the border issue. This is a very important topic for everyone. And this is my great chance to meet with specialists in India and from other places. So that's my great honor and my pleasure. So my time is about 30 minutes, right? So can I do my presentation until 3:40? Is it
Please
okay?
go ahead.
Okay. Then I want to show the PowerPoint. I prepared PowerPoint. So let me show this. So this is my PowerPoint, today's topic. And excuse me, today's content. So first, there is an introduction and historical background, and I will compare Chinese policy to USSR, Russia, and to India, and to Japan. And then I will make conclusion. This is my plan today. So introduction. I worked in Beijing as a minister and press spokesperson of the Japanese embassy from 2004 to 2007. And I met with many Chinese journalists. And Chinese journalists at that time were very active to call the Japanese embassy, and they asked me a lot of questions. So it was very interesting work to meet with Chinese journalists. And this is one of the result of my work. And please look at the black part. This is me, a bit younger than today. And I explained about the history and how Japanese teaches history to the Japanese children. Because Chinese people and Chinese journalists were always frustrated that they believe that Japan did not teach the history correctly. So I told them how we teach history and how the history textbooks in Japan are made. And please look at the white part. The left is Mr. Qinggang. Mr. Qinggang was at that time a press secretary of the foreign ministry of China. And he became the foreign minister and for some time. And now he was removed. So I met with Mr. Qinggang several times, and we had a discussion how to promote mutual understandings. And this is the journal, China News Weekly, and the layout is very interesting. Did you notice that Mr. Qinggang and also Korean press secretary, I'm sorry, his face is a bit cut, but a press spokesperson from South Korean embassy, they are white color, you see? And Japan, me, it's black color. And this is the layout of the Chinese journal. And after that, I asked a question to the editor-in-chief of China News Weekly. Why you put white and black? And they said, laughing, that, oh, Mr. Ide, black color is very cool in China. And so you don't like this color? This is what they said. And after some time, I started to reflect. And maybe it might reflect their traditional philosophy. And I would say black and white. This is traditional Chinese dualism, yin-yang, yin and yang, or friend and enemy. So German political thinker, Dr. Carl Schmitt said, friend or enemy. This is essence of politics. This is what Carl Schmitt said. And Mao Zedong also said, who are our enemies? Who are our friends? This is a question of the first importance for the revolution. So now I came to consider that Chinese traditionally tend to divide. This is white, this is friend, this is enemy, this is black. So I tend to consider this is one of Chinese characteristics. And in case of South Korea, here South Korea is white, but sometimes South Korea might be black. But the world is very nuanced, sometimes gray color. But according to Chinese mind, they tend to divide. Oh, you are white person, you are black person. So this is introduction of my work, and also introduction to the philosophical thinking. On the China-Russia border negotiations. Do you hear? Some internet is not stable with me. I researched Chinese and Russian literature, and I was in the Russian university. I got a master degree to write a thesis on China-Russian border negotiations at the Diplomatic Academy in Moscow. Okay, so I want to touch upon historical background. I think there is a so-called the Chinese world order. And for the Chinese, the emperor, the son of heaven, is in the center. And there are internal vassals, external vassals, tributary states, and such players put surrounding the emperor of China. And there are some gradations. So sometimes it's not clear. For example, Tibet or Sikkim or Monpa, and sometimes it's not clear. They are tributary states or they are in external vassals. It's a bit difficult. But Japan, in the east of China, Japan was always struggling against the Chinese world order. So Japan in the past, I mean, in ancient times, Japan sent tributary missions to China, but then Japan refused, and Japan was not a tributary state anymore. But Korea continued to be a tributary state. And Japanese scholars did very extensive work to study what's the relations between China, Korea, Japan. But in Japanese academics, situations around India is not yet clear. So we don't know exactly the situation, Tibet, Monpa, India, Sikkim, etc. These relations are very interesting for me. And this time I'm now in Delhi, and I visited Arunachal Pradesh, and I met with Monpa people, and I asked some of them how they remember the history about the relations with Tibet rule. And so I'm now studying this history. And so about this the Chinese world order, Dr. Fairbank of the United States, he wrote a book, The Chinese World Order. And also Japanese scholar Nishijima Sadao, he made a lot of studies, but unfortunately, most of them, almost all of them are in Japanese. So if he wrote his study in English, I can introduce, but most of them are Japanese. But he also studied this Chinese world model. And Sun Yat-sen, I think Sun Yat-sen basically supported this Chinese world order. And so we should not forget that this is the traditional Chinese world order. And it has still relevance when we consider Chinese diplomacy, Chinese relations with neighbors. And so I put three major powers, India, Japan, and Russia, surrounding China. And these three, India, Japan, Russia, had a lot of experiences to deal with this Chinese world order. So I really wish that Indian scholars, Indian diplomats, and Japanese and Russians, and Chinese, of course, and also Taiwan, we have, we should promote more academic exchanges to really understand what's happened and what should be in the future. So this is my framework of today's discussion. And again, there are interesting philosophers in the past, and Liang Qichao, Zhang Binlang, Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek. And these philosophers all worked in Japan. They came to Japan and they absorbed a lot of Japanese academic and political debates and results of Japanese people's work. So there are some influence from Japan. And for example, Liang Qichao, he introduced various important notion of the nation, notion of the state, Chinese nation. Liang Qichao introduced from Japanese literature, and he created such notions for China. And Zhang Binlang, he is a very unique philosopher. He said that the Chinese territory, the territory of New China, should be something equal to Han Dynasty, ancient Han Dynasty, so which excludes Mongol, Xinjiang, and Tibet. This was Zhang Binlang's idea, very unique. But Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek, they are rather expansionist. And, Sun Yat-sen even said that Korea or Vietnam should be included in the Chinese territory. This is what Sun Yat-sen said. And Sun Yat-sen also wrote his article and published in Japan that China is elder brother. Japan is a younger brother. This is what Sun Yat-sen said. So I consider that Sun Yat-sen was very traditional China world model thinker. And on the other hand, Chinese Communist Party, CCP, at first stage, communists supported federalism. So three regions, Mongol, Xinjiang, Tibet, have the right to leave the Chinese Federation Republic. This was their position in 1920s, 1930s. But then they changed, and federalism was abandoned in 1949. So this is also we should bear in our mind. And this is a very interesting map, Chinese map of national shame, published in 1939. And we don't know who wrote this map, but according to this map, Chinese territory is huge, and including Arunachal Pradesh and others. So I think this way of thinking has still influential to some political people in China, and also maybe in Taiwan. Well, Taiwan's case, I'm not so sure, but I think this map has still something to do with today's problems. And so let me talk a little bit about Chinese policy to USSR, Russia on land border issues. So I just want to draw your attention that several interesting points that there are some kind of rival relations between communist China and Taiwan, Republic of China, Taipei government. And for example, the status of Mongolia, once both of them abandoned Outer Mongolia, but then both of them changed and they wanted to bring back Outer Mongolia. So Zhou Enlai raised this issue to Khrushchev in 1954, but Khrushchev refused. It's Outer Mongolia. Mongolia is already independent, so they will not come back to Chinese family. Also, in 1969, Mao Zedong decided to attack Damansky Island. And then after that, Zhou Enlai and Kosygin met. And Zhou Enlai proposed to preserve status quo. But Kosygin was cautious about this concept. Status quo is one of keywords of Chinese foreign policy. And also in 1989, February, then Foreign Minister Shevardnadze visited Beijing. I read Shevardnadze's memoir in Russian language, and Deng Xiaoping at that time said that, China and Russia, at that time, Soviet Union, there are some disputes, territorial disputes, but then said that future generation will solve. Well, this phrase is also familiar to us. But when in 1989, when Gorbachev visited Beijing, Deng Xiaoping basically gave up 1.5 million square kilometers land, and it was controversial, but Deng Xiaoping basically decided to give up huge territories. But it was not Deng Xiaoping's decision, to be honest. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai already decided that. But anyway, so in 2004, they finally settled their border dispute. And now Chinese policy to India. Well, I don't need to explain what's happened between you and China, but for me, there are interesting aspects that in 1959, when Dalai Lama defected to India, I think Mao Zedong was really furious. And I checked his statements and in Chinese documents, literature, and Mao said, Nehru committed a sin, India made fool of us, and main issue is not McMahon line, but Tibet. These were Mao Zedong's remarks. And in 1962, Mao decided to attack India. And then Republic of China or Taipei government also criticized McMahon line. I checked the US State Department documents. There are microfilm in the Waseda University, and US State Department documents also confirmed. Recently, Taiwan scholars last year, 2 years ago, he also wrote about this based on Taiwan documents. But I also checked US State Department documents. And then Deng Xiaoping told you package deal or shelving the issue. And I read Professor Bhasin's compilation of 5 volumes of China-India relations, and I was surprised to find that Deng Xiaoping mentioned Japan-China relations, and he tried to sell, China-Japan model to Indians. And I found this article in Professor Bhasin's book, and it was very interesting for me. And also, I found that Tibet factor is very important for India-China border issue. Well, this is my hypothesis. And around 1985 and around 2006, talks with Dalai Lama and negotiations on border issues, both deadlocked almost at the same time, and around 2006. So my hypothesis is that Tibet factor is very important for China when they negotiate with India over territory issue, and the place of Taiwan in Arunachal Pradesh, it's related to the rule of their rule over Tibet. So these are interconnected. This is my understanding. Deng Xiaoping made remarks, interesting things to Indians, but all of you know. So I skip this, but he said in 1979, 1980, shelve the issue, or future generation will solve, or we should recognize status quo, put it aside. These things. And also Deng Xiaoping in 1982, he mentioned package solution. But when Rajiv Gandhi visited China in 1988, my understanding is that Deng Xiaoping didn't mention so-called package deal. So he stopped, he changed his mind. Maybe after 1985, they changed their mind, and they only vaguely mentioned a kind of give and take. I tried to compare Mao's decision to use military power to India 1962 and USSR 1969. And there are some common features. China perceived that this is Chinese territory, and the attack was not total war. Let the enemy accept Chinese position. And Chinese did not expect that the enemy's counterattack, counter defense does not match Chinese force. And so I see some common features. And Chinese policy to Japan on cedar border issues. So I put some history. And for example, in 1953, there is an article in the People's Daily, Renmin River, that which acknowledged that Senkaku Islands are part of Okinawa. And in 1958, China published a map indicating Senkaku as a part of Okinawa. But in 1969, ECAFE, Economic Council for Asia and Far East, reported about possible oil resources in the East China Sea surrounding around the Senkaku Islands. Then first Republic of China, Taipei, in June, and then Communist China in December started their claim on Senkaku. And in 1972, when Japan and China normalized diplomatic relations, Zhou Enlai told Japanese Prime Minister Tanaka, Zhou Enlai said, this time I do not want to talk about Senkaku. It is not good to talk about it now. It became an issue because of the oil out there. If there wasn't oil, neither Taiwan nor the US would make this an issue. So Zhou Enlai, his remarks is a kind of a de facto shelving or putting aside. And Deng Xiaoping also shelved. He several times said to shelve, put aside Senkaku. Deng Xiaoping's remarks on border issues. So he mentioned several times, but especially in 1978, when Deng Xiaoping came to Japan, he said, we can put aside the Senkaku issue. We can, the next generation would have some wisdom. Very similar, what he said to India. And this is in Chinese language version. People's Daily also reported what Deng Xiaoping said during the press conference. And he said to the American academic people in 1984 that a joint development is important and let's shelve sovereignty issue. And China needs peace at least 20 years. So this is what Deng Xiaoping said in 1984. But for your reference, there was efforts between Japan and China to realize joint development. But in 1986, Chinese side said, if Japan agrees to shelve Japan's claim of possession of the Diaoyu Islands, so Senkaku Islands, then China can enter into negotiations for joint development. So Japan cannot accept because Senkaku Islands are under Japanese administration, and so there is no room for us to give up this sovereignty to Chinese. And then in 1992, China practically abandoned negotiations with Japan, and they made a new law on territorial water and connecting water. And according to this law, Senkaku Islands are Chinese territory. So they changed their position. And concerning the South China Sea issue, I found Jiang Zemin's statement in 2001. Here, Jiang Zemin mentioned to shelve the disputes and jointly develop in 2001. So Jiang Zemin was selected by Deng Xiaoping. So I think Jiang Zemin followed Deng Xiaoping's approach. But Xi Jinping said China has actively constructed islands in the South China Sea. So Xi Jinping changed. Xi Jinping's tone different from Jiang Zemin. So conclusion.
You might like to conclude next 5 minutes.
Pardon?
You might like to conclude in next 5 minutes.
Yes, okay. This is my last slide. So I will conclude. So People's Republic of China's policy on border issues, this is related to multiple factors, of course, and their traditional philosophy and security concerns, economic policy, rule over Tibet, relations with Dalai Lama, rivalry with ROC, Taiwan, and psychology perception of the leaders, enemy and friend. And Mao Zedong, for him, decisive factor is enemy or friend. And enemy, Mao Zedong could use military power if the enemy's reaction expected not to be so strong. Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping proposed shelving, but they did not articulate exactly what's this idea. And also, they didn't change from the traditional Chinese view, Chinese world order. After all, to put aside sovereignty issue was not viable. So this approach was not accepted by Japan. Xi Jinping pursues the great revival of the Chinese nation, so he stopped saying shelving, etc. And what should we do? So dialogue and deterrence are very important, and we should bear in our mind, and maybe we should tell them Chinese. The Chinese world order idea should be is very tricky. So please make your mind clear. And use of military power is fertile, counterproductive. And please don't have enemy perception. Compromise should be made based on mutual interests. This is my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gule. You have a very well laid out plan for your thesis, and I have no doubt that you will succeed because of your hard work that you are putting in, and we will also benefit from your work, provided it is in English language. If you decide to write in Japanese, we will be unfortunately not be able to access it. Well, it is true, Chinese have the habit of marking their friends and adversaries in various colors, but that is their business and should not be cause of worry to us. We have not much studies in Russia and Chinese border problem. We have some, but not intensive studies as you plan to do it, and we will certainly benefit from your study once it is made and provided it is in English language. Because if it is in Japanese, only few Japanese knowing will be able to benefit from it. But English language give it wider publicity and wider information. Well, you see, the Dalai Lama is, of course, a very big factor as far as Chinese are concerned. In 1950, when China occupied Tibet, Dalai Lama had asked India for asylum, and we promised him asylum also. But when the Chinese got to know about Dalai Lama's plan for asylum in India, they warned India that if you give asylum to Dalai Lama in India, our relation will come under dark clouds. And as you know, he did not come. See, Dalai Lama's presence is, of course, cause of concern to them. But this Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, as long as he lives, is definitely a source of problem for them. But this Dalai Lama is be 89 in 4 months' time. In July, he will be 89. How long he lives, one cannot say. But once he is no more, there will be problem because somebody has to be his incarnation because there's sensitivity attached to the incarnation. Incarnation will be a child. Now, what will be his status by the time he grows up into full-fledged Dalai Lama and studied the scriptures, and studied the religion, and studied everything? It will be 18 years. And whether those 18 years he will be forgotten or he will vanish, one doesn't know. The Chinese might appoint one in Tibet, find some boy, some young man, and declare him to be his incarnate and recognize him. So this is a very problem in a fluid stage. We cannot say anything definite about the Dalai Lama at this stage. So that is our problem. I think I don't have much comments to make because this is your plan that you gave for your thesis. And as I said, I am particularly not very well versed with the relations between China and Russia in those details. So I am not able to say much. Therefore, I will like to open it for questions. If our listeners have any questions on this subject, they will be happy to put. So let us have the question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bhasin. We have 3 questions in the chat box. With your permission, may I please read
please
them
go
out?
ahead.
Thank you so much, sir. The first question is from Mr. Rajkumar. He has directed the question to Ide Sensei. He asks, can India reactivate the Russia-India-Japan trilateral in the medium to the long term? And can India help out both Russia and Japan to get an understanding on the Kuril Islands issue, as India did in Sakhalin issue, even after the Ukraine war and its sanctions?
With Russia, yes, for us, Russia is of course very important country, and I am a member of the editorial board of Russian academic journal, Russian China Studies. There is such a journal, And so so far I didn't contribute much, but I continue to have academic relations with Russia, and I teach Russian students online Japanese history. And in this lecture, I try to teach Russian students about the specific features of the Chinese world order. And Japan was in that order, but Japanese leaders try to sometimes fight against this disorder. So anyway, at this moment, yes, we have difficulties for cooperation, but we will see. And I'm always hopeful to recover our cooperative relations with Russia. So why not with India also? So let's see how situation will further develop.
Next question.
Yes, sir. So we have a question from Mr. Ashok Kant. Sir, may I please request you to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Ambassador Ide, for that fascinating presentation, and also for looking at three parallel set of negotiations involving China on one side and India, Japan, and Russia or Soviet Union on the other side. Well, one of them has been brought to a successful conclusion. China's boundary negotiations with Russia. Though there again, I think a point to note is that Chinese could have completed those negotiations way back in 1964, as you also referred to in your slide on China-Russia negotiations. At that time, they had reached an agreement when only major difference was on what Chinese call Heishan's island. That eventually was resolved with island being divided between China and Russia in the agreement which was concluded in early 1990s. 1964, Mao Zedong, in fact, very deliberately.
Okay, this is my favorite topic.
Yeah, so
and you are right.
Yeah,
and
sabotaged the negotiations. In fact, at the last minute, when Liu Shaoqi thought that he's ready to sign the agreement, because the agreement, negotiations had more or less been concluded, Mao Zedong stepped in. That had more to do with China's domestic politics. So that's one aspect we have to bear in mind, that all these negotiations, there is a major component of China's domestic politics. So as you're aware, there was turmoil within China, differences between China and Soviet Union come out in the open. So at that 64, Mao Zedong came up with this, resurrecting so-called unequal treaties argument and making claim on a huge chunk of territory in Soviet Far East. So that didn't proceed. India, China,
yes,
finally when it was
yes, thank you very much. You are right.
Yeah. Finally, when it was concluded, my own understanding is that it had to do a lot with how China assessed its relations with Soviet Union or Russia at that point of time, a need to make up with China. So larger strategic context, the relationship became a decisive factor. And that has been the case also when it comes to India-China boundary negotiations. As you rightly mentioned, China had offered a package proposal. In fact, Deng Xiaoping reiterated that until 1980s. It was only in 85 that they changed the interpretation or definition of package proposal. But the linkage that you are making between progress or boundary talks with India and the Dalai Lama issue, that might be true to a certain extent in 1950s. But, stalemate that was reached in 2005, I was involved, I was negotiating at that time. It was not so much linked to Dalai Lama. In fact, there were other issues, including the fact that China thought it had arrived and it had started taking a more hardline position in its talks with both India and Japan. So, today the question I wanted to pose to you, in outstanding boundary differences that China has with Japan and India, what kind of prognosis do you have? Because today, Chinese have entered a phase where you talked about China's worldview, a very Sino-centric view of emerging global order. Then, Xi Jinping taking the position that not an inch of territory to be ceded. So sovereignty has become a very major consideration for China. Against that backdrop, do you see any opening or possibility of China showing any degree of flexibility in its talks with Japan on Senkaku, or what Chinese call Diaoyu Island, and in boundary talks with India? What is your, as someone who has studied these three set of negotiations, what is your crystal ball gauging?
Okay, thank you very much. And firstly, you are right that in 1964, basically China and Russia came to an agreement, and at final moment, Mao Zedong somehow intervened, and Mao Zedong destroyed the negotiations. And you are right. And in retrospect, in 1924. When first China, at that time, Republic of China, Kuomintang, and Republic of China and the Soviet Union negotiated in 1924, I think Republic of China requested huge territory to be returned. But new communist China decided to give up 1.5 million square kilometers. So it was much easier to make compromise because China gave up. So the left issue was only small islands on the river, Amur River and Usuri rivers. So China made huge concession already in 1964. But somehow Mao Zedong didn't like that China made a huge concession. And we don't know exact deliberations within Chinese leaders. We don't have enough information. And now your question. So what's the prognosis? I think there are three elements. So firstly, their perception, strategic perception, and India is friend or enemy. Japan is friend or enemy. And Japan was not considered as enemy in the past. Well, this is my understanding. So that's why China didn't attack Japan. But in the future, I'm not so sure. So we should have enough deterrent military power to deter their military move. So deterrence is necessary. Secondly, so the first is enemy or friend's perception. So we should not let China consider us as enemy. We are not the enemy. So first, enemy or friend. Second, deterrence. The third is we should tell them that they have still vague China-centric world order views. So, for example, this time I visited Arunachal Pradesh, and I studied Monpa and Monpa people and Tibet people's, Tibet government, Tibet relations. And Tibet ruled Monpa but it does not mean that Tibet can request Monpa people's land. And Tibet once denounced, according to Simla Convention in 1914, Tibet agreed to give up Monpa people's territory. So Tibet should not request Monpa people's territory. And Monpa people do not want that Tibet rule will come back. So Tibet also made a kind of Tibet world order. This is my understanding. So there are China world order, and also there are some kind of copy, Japan world order, or Tibet world order. So this way of thinking should be reviewed. And so I think academic people can clarify the history, and so that China will understand the history, and so that they can denounce their territorial claims, which was not founded well in the historical argument. So academic people, as well as former diplomats, we should further deepen our dialogue, so that they will slowly maybe understand the such historical context. So these three, I think, are important.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was very helpful. I would like to keep in touch with you separately.
Thank you very much. Me too. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, may I ask a supplementary question? You said in the past China did not consider Japan enemy. Which past are you talking about?
Well, I mean, after the World War II. And so Mao Zedong, when Japan and China normalized relations in 1972, Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai were, nice to Japan. And when Deng Xiaoping came to power, Deng Xiaoping chose Japan as a kind of model for their economic development. So Deng Xiaoping came to Japan in 1978, and he met with the Japanese emperor. I showed the picture, and it was very good picture, because Deng Xiaoping and Chinese people met with the emperor, and afterward, Emperor of Japan visited China. So it was a very symbolically important step to become good friends. So in 1980s, Japan was a good friend for China. 1990s, maybe.
And currently?
So, yeah.
And currently, at the present moment?
Currently, I'm not so sure. Situation is a bit maybe not so good.
Next question,
but
please.
But we should not lose our hope.
Thank you, sir. We have two more questions in the chat box, and they more or less surround the same topic. I'll take them up together. First is by Mr. Rajkumar, and he asks Ide Sensei, what are Xi Jinping's view on Outer Manchuria region, which was ceded to Russia, and would it get changed if Russia gets weakened in the medium to the long term? And the second question is from Colonel Venkatraman. He asks, despite having nearly identical views on the border disputes with Russia and India until the late 1980s, China settled its border dispute with Russia in the early 1990s. However, the border dispute with India still lingers. What, in your opinion, are some of the reasons for this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think why China and Russia came to compromise, and the reason is that China considered Russia as a good partner to fight against United States unilateral world. And so China chose Russia as a partner. And after the Tiananmen incident of 1989, Americans and Europeans stopped their export of weapons to China. But Russia, Soviet Union and Russia continued to supply weapons to China. So for China, Russia was very important and strategically very important. So China chose Russia as one of most important not allies officially, but partners. And I think President Putin was very smart that he made some concession to China, and he gave about half portion of Heyshaz Island on the Amur River and Usuri River. And so, China could request whole Heyshaz Island, but China stopped their request, and half was the compromise. So Chinese interests and Russian interests got together so that they concluded their compromise. But in case of China, India, well, China does not consider India as such an important partner as they consider Russia. And so this is one of the very important basis. So border issue is not just a legal issue. It's a strategic matter. So China needs to consider India as a strategically necessary partner. Then they might make concession. This is my understanding.
Do you think this ideology played any role in Russia-China relations fluctuation? Role of ideology in China-Russia relations?
Well, I think after 2008, there was a Lehman shock and economic situation got worse. And also Americans did so-called, to help democratization. And there were many so-called colored revolution. So Chinese were very much worried about possible internal changes. So they stiffened their position. And I think that's the background why Chinese foreign policy became to more and more hardliner.
Yes, please ask next question if there is any.
Thank you, sir. We have a raised hand from Professor Alkacharya. Ma'am, may I please request you to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Thanks, Akshat. I think there was another question which preceded my raised hand. Isn't there in the chat box?
Certainly, ma'am. There is a question from Mr. Vignesh, and it is directed towards Ide Sensei. He broadly asks that in the case of an India-China war, do you think that there might be a possibility for a military coup in China?
Excuse me, I don't understand the point of the question. Military coup?
Yes, sir, that is what the Mr. Vignesh has asked. That could there potentially be a military coup in China in the event of China's entry into a war with India?
You mean in 1962?
I think, Akshat, the two things are not linked really. The question basically, Ide-san, is that what is your view about an India-China war on the border issue? Do you think two countries will go to a war? And the second question is that do you think there'll be a military coup in China? So I think these are two separate issues.
Okay.
Maybe let me ask my question here, and then you could possibly address both. So thank you very much. It was indeed a very, very interesting talk that you gave us. My question really is to do with whether the Chinese in their approach, so you have brought out this point about friend and enemy. I mean, that's the larger kind of prism with which they are addressing questions boundaries, disputes, and so on. But if we look at just in a sort of perspective, the Chinese were very willing to consider, give and take, compromise, offer all sorts of possibilities for a fairly long period of time. But as the Chinese start to become a much more powerful economic player, and then obviously power asymmetry between India and China increases, we see them taking a much more hard line on the border, that they're no longer ready to make compromises. So is it this kind of a position related more to their friend-enemy prism, or is it a question of power that now they can actually call the shots, and so they are not interested in compromises? So it's nothing to do with friend or enemy, but a question of saying that now we can actually impose a solution if necessary. What would you think would be a greater, more plausible kind of an explanation for the current situation?
Thank you very much. So, firstly, enemy-friend prism is my favorite theory. But friends can become enemy can become friends, well, according to Mao Zedong. And so we don't know in the future. India might, I don't know whether, I don't say that India is considered as enemy, but India might become a good friend. Why not? And also, the basis of their territorial demand is based on the China-centric worldview. And in that model, there was no clear boundary of the Chinese China world. So I guess they don't know where is the boundary by themselves. So Zhou Enlai, he himself tried to understand and step by step. So and I explained briefly that after the World War II, Communist China didn't know whether Senkaku Islands is Japanese island or Chinese island. They didn't know that. So sometimes in 1950s, they showed that, oh, Senkaku Islands is Japanese territory. But Taiwan started to say, oh, Senkaku is Chinese. Then Beijing followed Taipei's position. So they don't know themselves where is the boundary. And because there was no such notion of boundary in the past Chinese history. So we should have a dialogue with them. And maybe you are confused and about the boundary of the modern nation states. So we need more dialogue so that they would understand. Without dialogue, they never understand.
Is there any other question, please?
No, sir. There are no more questions in the chat box right now. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Professor Ide. You are both a professor and an ambassador. So sometime I miss one for the other. So I hope you don't mind being called a professor also, which is your latest profession. I thank you very much for your very interesting discussion, and your presentation was really beneficial to most of us who were not very much aware of the Russia's and Chinese problems. And I think we have learned something from you. And with your book comes, it will be of much more useful to the scholar fraternity. I take this opportunity to thank you once again, and also Alka Acharya, Professor Alka Acharya, for giving me this opportunity, and to the members of the ICS staff, members of the ICS officers rather, who have been very, very helpful in organizing this seminar and have been instrumental in helping me in conducting these proceedings. So I am most grateful to all of them. And also, last but not least, Ambassador Shokanta for asking the most pertinent question and all in the whole series. And thank you, everybody. And with that, I say goodbye. Hope to meet you sometime. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. With your permission, shall we bring today's proceedings to a close?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Akshat,
please.
once the video recording is switched off, just hold on a bit. I'd like to say something else. So let me know when the video is.
Certainly, ma'am. With this, we come to at the end of today's seminar. We thank Ide Sensei and Mr. Bhasin for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. The video of today's discussion shall be available on the ICS's YouTube channel. We would also love to welcome you to a special lecture scheduled on 2nd March 2024, that is the coming Saturday, titled Communism versus Capitalism in Everyday Chinese Life since 1949, the life and